After I pretended to inherit a fortune, my mom suddenly loved me again, until she found out the truth and told me, "You're nothing but a manipulative liar." When I asked if any of it was ever real, she laughed and said, "Of course not." I walked away. That was 1 year ago. Yesterday, she called my brother, begging to talk to me. I convinced my family I inherited a fortune just to see how they'd react. Growing up, I was always the family scapegoat. My older sister was the golden child, a skinny and conventionally attractive girl who could do no wrong. My younger brother was the baby of the family, a boy with extremely mild ADHD, who wasn't expected to take accountability for anything. As for me, they loved me for what I was, not who I was. You see, I was the one they called when they needed help moving, when their car broke down, or when they needed a shoulder to cry on. But when it came to my life, they couldn't care less. When I turned 10 and realized it was the 10th year in a row that no one remembered to celebrate my birthday, I started my own tradition of buying a cupcake and blowing out an unlit candle by myself. I'm literally nowhere to be found in the family photo albums, and my siblings were constantly stealing money from my piggy bank. Fast forward to when I was 16, and I had endured 16 years of full-blown emotional neglect. My grandfather on my late dad's side had passed away. Before he died, I was literally the only one who'd visit him on his farm and even bother to take care of him. So I had a light bulb moment. We were all sitting together at the kitchen table when I announced it. "Guys, Granddad Harold died." My mom just shrugged her shoulders, and my siblings just ignored me. Yeah, so in his will, he left me everything. A pretty crazy amount of money, to be honest. I still can't believe it. Their reactions were instant. My sister's eyes widened with envy. My brother almost choked on his drink. And my mom, who treated me like I was a carrier of the Black Plague disease, grabbed my hand and said how proud she was of me. It was surreal, almost laughable. So much so that I didn't take it back. I needed to see how long I could keep it up. Suddenly, I was invited to every event. My siblings, who usually ignored me, started calling to ask about my day. My mom would text me heart emojis out of the blue, but I just kept playing the part. I blew my savings on renting a flashy green Lambo for the week, and even staged a trip to Europe by taking photos at a fancy local hotel and faking the Instagram location. That's when my phone started buzzing faster than a girl's toy in a long-distance relationship. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention. It was intoxicating. For a brief moment, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, they had changed. But the requests started to pile up. My sister wanted a loan to redo her kitchen. My mom asked for help with medical bills. For a while, I managed to successfully dodge their questions by saying the estate hadn't settled yet. I promised to see what I could do. I started to panic. I didn't have $10 to spare, let alone $10,000. Desperate to keep the lie going, I maxed out my credit cards and took out a personal loan. I started dodging phone calls when the debt collectors got aggressive. I needed them to love me just a little bit longer. But then came the final straw. My mom, suspicious after I kept delaying payments, called our cousin who worked in probate law. When she found out there was no inheritance, no will, nothing at all, she confronted me at Sunday dinner. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tears began to stream down my face. I could practically feel their love slipping away like sand in my fingers. The silence was suffocating. My brother shook his head, muttering about how I was always a screw-up. My sister called me a manipulative liar. "I never realized you were this pathetic," my mom whispered, like she was talking to a stranger. I sheepishly retreated to my room, not wanting to face the disappointment of the people I loved most. That's when, once again, my phone started blowing up. But this time, it was with hate. I was getting calls from distant relatives who heard the story, calling me disgusting for faking wealth. My siblings even posted online about how I'd betrayed the family. I couldn't believe how quickly the affection had vanished. I had to sell almost everything I owned just to get out of debt. And after I graduated, I moved into Granddad's Harold's farm to work full-time. But there was one silver lining. I didn't have to pretend anymore. And turns out, Harold was willing to accept me just as I was. I wasn't wealthy, but I was free, or so I thought. Because there was one thing I didn't account for. By moving out, I wasn't the scapegoat anymore, and the role needed to be replaced. That person became my older sister, except she hadn't been trained her whole life, so she couldn't handle it like I did. So that's when I got the call from my brother. She had ended her own life. I remember exactly where I was when I got that call, standing in Harold's old barn, fixing a tractor that hadn't run right in years. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I almost didn't answer it. My brother Ethan hadn't called me in months, not since the whole inheritance fiasco blew up. I wiped my greasy hands on my jeans and picked up. His voice sounded hollow, empty. He just said it straight out. Melissa was gone. Took a bunch of pills. Mom found her. I dropped the wrench I was holding and it hit the concrete floor with a clang that echoed through the empty barn. I couldn't process what he was saying. My sister, who'd always been the perfect one, the golden child, was dead because of what I did. I drove to my mom's house in a daze. The old pickup truck Harold left me sputtered and coughed the whole way there. I kept thinking about Melissa, about how we used to be close when we were really little, before Mom started playing favorites, about how she'd slowly turned colder toward me as we grew up. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a minute. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left 6 months ago. Same peeling paint, same cracked walkway. I finally got out and walked to the door. I didn't know if I should knock or just walk in. I used to live here, but now I felt like a stranger. I knocked. Ethan opened the door. His eyes were red and puffy. He didn't hug me or even say hello. He just turned and walked back inside. I followed him into the living room where my mom sat on the couch, staring at nothing. When she saw me, her face hardened. She didn't even let me sit down before she started. According to her, this was all my fault. My lie about the inheritance had started everything. When I left, the family dynamics shifted. Mom needed someone new to blame for everything, and Melissa became the target. Nothing she did was good enough anymore. Her job wasn't prestigious enough. Her boyfriend wasn't ambitious enough. Her clothes weren't stylish enough. I stood there taking it all in. My mom's words hit me like physical blows. Ethan just sat there, not defending me, not saying anything. I wanted to argue, to point out that mom was the one who created this toxic environment in the first place. But what was the point? Melissa was gone. Nothing would bring her back. The funeral was 3 days later, a small, sad affair at the local church. I sat in the back row, away from my mom and Ethan. A few of Melissa's friends from high school showed up. Her boyfriend Tyler was there, looking shell-shocked. I didn't approach any of them. What would I even say? After the service, I went back to the farm alone. I sat on Harold's old porch swing and cried for the first time since I got the news. I cried for Melissa, for the relationship we never had. I cried for myself and the years of neglect I'd endured. I cried for my broken family that would never be whole again. The next morning, I woke up to pounding on my door. It was Tyler, Melissa's boyfriend. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. He pushed past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. He paced around my living room, running his hands through his hair. Tyler told me Melissa had left him a letter. In it, she explained everything. How mom had turned on her after I left. How she couldn't handle the constant criticism and emotional abuse. How she missed the way things used to be when she was the favorite. The letter also mentioned something else. A diary Melissa had kept for years. Tyler had found it hidden in their apartment. He'd read enough to know it contained secrets about our family that Melissa had been keeping. He brought it with him, tossed it on my coffee table. A plain black notebook with my sister's name written on the cover in silver marker. I didn't want to read it. It felt like invading her privacy, but Tyler insisted. He said there were things in there I needed to know. Things about mom, about our family history. Things that might explain why she treated us the way she did. I made coffee while Tyler crashed on my couch, emotionally exhausted. When he fell asleep, I picked up the diary and started reading. The first entries were from when Melissa was 13, typical teenage stuff. But as I flipped through the pages, I found entries about me, about how mom would tell her to stay away from me, that I was just like your father. That confused me. Our dad had died when I was a baby. I barely remembered him. Mom rarely talked about him. I kept reading, and the pieces started falling into place. According to Melissa's diary, our dad hadn't just died. He'd left mom for another woman when I was an infant. Apparently, I looked just like him, and every time mom looked at me, she saw the man who had abandoned her. That's why she couldn't love me properly. That's why I became the scapegoat. But there was more, much more. Melissa wrote about overhearing arguments between mom and Harold, my grandfather, about money that was supposed to be for all of us kids, about promises that were broken, about secrets that were kept. The last entry was dated just 2 days before she died. She wrote about feeling trapped, about not knowing how to escape mom's criticism, about how she finally understood what I had gone through all those years. And at the very end, a single line, I found the real Will. Everything changes now. The real Will? What did that mean? I closed the diary and looked over at Tyler, still passed out on my couch. What had Melissa discovered? And why did she think it would change everything? I needed answers. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the box of Harold's personal effects I'd kept after he died. Old photos, his reading glasses, a pocket watch, nothing that looked like a will. I emptied the box completely, checking every item. That's when I noticed the lining of the box seemed loose. I pulled at it, and it came away easily. Underneath was a folded document. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It was indeed a will, dated just a month before Harold died, and it left everything, the farm, his savings, everything, to be divided equally among his grandchildren, me, Melissa, and Ethan. But that's not what happened. The farm came to me only because no one else wanted it. There had been no money, no savings to speak of, or so I thought. The will mentioned an account at First National Bank, an account I knew nothing about. Had mom known? Had she somehow accessed this money and kept it from us? Is that what Melissa discovered? I needed to find out the truth. For Melissa. For myself. I carefully folded the will and put it in my pocket. Tyler was still sleeping, so I left him a note saying I'd be back soon. I got in my truck and headed toward town, toward the bank, toward answers that might finally explain the dysfunction that had defined my family for as long as I could remember. First, National Bank was a small brick building on Main Street. I'd passed it 1,000 times, but never had a reason to go inside. My palms were sweaty as I pushed through the glass doors. The cool air conditioning hit me, along with the smell of paper and cleaning products. I approached the first available teller, a middle-aged woman with a name tag that read, Patricia. I explained that my grandfather had recently passed away, and I'd found documentation of an account in his name. She asked for ID and the account information from the will. Patricia's eyes widened slightly as she looked at her computer screen. She excused herself and disappeared into a back office. 5 minutes later, she returned with a man in a suit who introduced himself as Roger, the bank manager. He invited me into his office, and my heart started racing. Something was definitely up. Roger closed the door behind us and sat behind his desk. He folded his hands and looked at me with a serious expression. The account existed all right. It was a trust fund Harold had set up years ago for his grandchildren. According to Roger, there had been regular withdrawals from the account over the past 10 years. Large withdrawals. I felt sick to my stomach. The money was supposed to be for us kids, for our education, our futures, but someone had been taking it, and I had a pretty good idea who. Roger showed me the paperwork, Mom had been named as the trustee, responsible for managing the money until we turned 25. She had complete access. I asked how much was originally in the account. Roger hesitated, then told me, $500,000. My grandfather had sold some land before he died and put all the money away for us. Now there was less than $50,000 left. I thanked Roger, got copies of all the transactions, and left the bank in a daze. I sat in my truck, staring at the papers. Mom had been stealing from us for years, using our inheritance to fund her lifestyle. No wonder she could afford that new car last year. No wonder she always had the latest iPhone. It was all making sense now. I drove straight to my mom's house. I needed to confront her. I needed to know why. The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I parked haphazardly in the driveway and stormed up to the door. I didn't knock this time. I just walked in. Mom was in the kitchen, making a sandwich. She looked up, surprised to see me. Before she could say anything, I slapped the bank statements down on the counter. Her face went pale. She knew exactly what they were. I asked her how she could do this to us, how she could steal our future. She started crying, saying she needed the money, that raising 3 kids alone was expensive. I reminded her that the money wasn't for her. It was for us, for our college funds, for our first homes, for our futures. She got defensive then, saying I didn't understand how hard it had been for her, how my father had left her with nothing, how she deserved some happiness. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was justifying stealing from her own children. That's when Ethan walked in. He'd been upstairs and heard us arguing. He looked confused, so I handed him the bank statements. He read them slowly, his expression changing from confusion to shock to anger. He looked at Mom like he was seeing her for the first time. Mom tried to turn Ethan against me, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing, that she had used the money for our benefit. But the statements didn't lie. Designer clothes, spa retreats, a timeshare in Florida, none of that was for us. Ethan surprised me then. For the first time in our lives, he took my side. He told Mom he couldn't believe she'd do something like this, especially after what happened to Melissa. Mom's face hardened. She told us both to get out of her house, that we were ungrateful, just like our father. We left, Ethan following me in his car back to the farm. We sat on Harold's porch and talked for hours. Really talked. For the first time since we were kids. Ethan admitted he'd always been jealous of me, of how capable I was, how I didn't need anyone's help. He thought I was Mom's favorite because she never criticized me the way she did him. I laughed at that. A bitter, hollow laugh. I told him about the birthdays, about the piggy bank, about all the years of being invisible. He seemed genuinely shocked. We'd been living in the same house but experiencing completely different childhoods. Tyler woke up while we were talking. He joined us on the porch, and I filled him in on what we'd discovered. He wasn't surprised. Apparently, Melissa had suspected something like this for months. She'd confronted Mom about it the day before she died. That hit me like a truck. Had that confrontation pushed Melissa over the edge? Had Mom said something to her? Something so horrible that Melissa couldn't take it anymore? I needed to know what happened that day. The 3 of us decided to go back to Melissa and Tyler's apartment. Tyler thought there might be more information there, something that could tell us what happened in those final days. The apartment was small, but neat. Melissa had always been organized. We started searching, looking through her desk, her files, her computer. Tyler knew her passwords, so we checked her emails and social media messages. Nothing seemed unusual until we found a hidden folder on her laptop, labeled simply M. Inside were screenshots. Dozens of them. Text conversations between Melissa and Mom from the last few months. As I scrolled through them, my blood ran cold. Mom had been gaslighting Melissa, telling her she was worthless, that she was a disappointment, that she would never amount to anything. The same thing she'd said to me for years, but there was worse. In the last conversation, dated the day before Melissa died, Mom had told her that Dad hadn't just left, he'd unalived himself, and that Melissa was heading down the same path, that she was weak, just like him. I felt physically sick. Ethan had to run to the bathroom to throw up. Tyler just sat there, tears streaming down his face. This was beyond emotional abuse. This was psychological torture, and it had pushed Melissa to her breaking point. We found something else too, a flash drive hidden in a hollowed-out book on Melissa's shelf. On it were copies of bank statements, similar to the ones I'd gotten from the bank, but going back further. Melissa had been investigating for months. She'd built a case against Mom, documenting every withdrawal, every lie. There was also a draft of an email to a lawyer, asking about the legality of what Mom had done. Melissa had been planning to take legal action, to expose Mom and reclaim what was rightfully ours, but she never sent it. We stayed at the apartment until late that night, piecing together Melissa's final days. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking. She'd been fighting a battle on 2 fronts, against Mom's emotional abuse and against the theft of our inheritance. And in the end, it had been too much for her. As we were leaving, Tyler handed me a small box. Inside was an engagement ring. He'd been planning to propose to Melissa the weekend after she died. He told me to take it, to use it somehow to make things right. I promised him I would. Back at the farm, Ethan and I stayed up late making plans. We needed to confront Mom again, but this time with all the evidence. We needed to make her understand the consequences of what she'd done. Not just the money, but what she'd done to Melissa, what she'd done to all of us. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a woman named Lauren, Melissa's therapist. She'd heard about Melissa's death and wanted to talk to the family. I agreed to meet her at her office that afternoon. Lauren's office was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. She explained that while she couldn't share the specifics of her sessions with Melissa due to confidentiality, she felt compelled to reach out because of something Melissa had shared in their last session. According to Lauren, Melissa had been making progress in therapy, working through her complicated feelings about our family. But in their final session, she'd been distraught about something she'd discovered about Mom, something that went beyond the financial theft. Lauren couldn't tell me what it was, but she suggested I look look through Melissa's things for a red notebook, not the black diary we'd already found, but a separate red one. She believed it might contain the information Melissa had been so upset about. I thanked Lauren and left, my mind racing. What else could there be? What could be worse than what we already knew? I called Ethan and Tyler, and we met back at Melissa's apartment to search for this red notebook. We tore the place apart, looking everywhere, under the mattress, behind the bookshelves, in every drawer and cabinet. Nothing. We were about to give up when Tyler remembered something. Melissa had a safe deposit box at the same bank where Harold had set up the trust fund. She'd mentioned it once but never told him what was in it. The three of us rushed to First National Bank. Tyler had Melissa's key, but he needed her death certificate and proof that he was her next of kin to access the box. Luckily, he had both. The bank manager, Roger, remembered me from the day before and expedited the process. A bank employee led us to a small room and brought in the safe deposit box. Tyler's hands shook as he unlocked it. Inside was exactly what we were looking for, a red notebook. But there was more. There were also old photographs, letters, and a USB drive. We took everything back to the farm to go through it properly. The red notebook contained Melissa's deepest thoughts, things she couldn't even tell her therapist. As I read through it, I felt like I was finally getting to know my sister, the real Melissa, behind the perfect facade. She wrote about the pressure of being the golden child, of never feeling like she could make a mistake. She wrote about her guilt over how Mom treated me, how she'd been too afraid to stand up for me, and she wrote about her suspicions about Dad's death. According to Melissa, she'd found old newspaper clippings in Mom's bedroom, clippings about Dad's car accident. The official story was that he'd lost control on a rainy night and crashed into a tree, but the newspaper reported that there had been no skid marks, no attempt to brake, and his blood alcohol level had been 0. Melissa had started to suspect that Dad's death wasn't an accident at all, that maybe Mom had something to do with it. It seemed far-fetched, but then I remembered what Mom had told Melissa in that final text conversation, that Dad had unalived himself. But was that the truth? The USB drive contained scanned copies of police reports and insurance documents related to Dad's death. Melissa had been thorough in her investigation. The police report noted some inconsistencies in Mom's statement, but nothing conclusive. The insurance payout had been substantial, another life insurance policy we knew nothing about. The old photographs showed Mom and Dad in happier times. They looked so young, so in love. It was hard to reconcile those images with the bitter, angry woman who had raised us. What had happened to change her so dramatically? Among the letters was one from Dad to Harold, dated just a week before the car accident. In it, Dad expressed concerns about Mom's behavior, saying she'd been acting erratically, making accusations, threatening to take us kids away if he left her. He was planning to divorce her and was worried about what she might do. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture none of us wanted to see. Had Mom been responsible for Dad's death? Had she somehow staged the accident? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was compelling. Ethan was in denial, refusing to believe Mom could do something so terrible. Tyler was silent, processing everything through the lens of his grief for Melissa. And me? I felt numb, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life, not my own. We decided we needed more information before confronting Mom again. We needed to talk to someone who knew her back then, someone who might have insights into what really happened. I remembered Harold mentioning an old friend of Dad's, a man named Patrick, who had been his best friend since childhood. It took some digging, but we found Patrick living in a small town about an hour away. We called ahead, and he agreed to meet us. He seemed surprised to hear from us, but said he'd always wondered how we kids had turned out. Patrick lived in a modest house with a well-kept garden. He was in his 60s now, with gray hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He invited us in and offered us coffee. We sat in his living room, surrounded by photos of his own family, feeling like strangers in a normal home. I explained why we were there, showing him the letter from Dad to Harold. Patrick read it slowly, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he set it down and took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes. Patrick confirmed what we'd begun to suspect. Dad had been planning to leave Mom. He'd confided in Patrick about her increasingly erratic behavior, her jealousy, her control issues. Dad had been afraid, not for himself, but for us kids, especially for me, the youngest, at the time. On the night of the accident, Dad had called Patrick. He was on his way to meet with a lawyer about filing for divorce and seeking custody of us children. He never made it to that appointment. Patrick had always had his suspicions about the accident, but could never prove anything. As we were leaving, Patrick gave me a small box. Inside was Dad's watch, the one he'd been wearing the night he died. The police had given it to Patrick for safekeeping, but he'd always meant for it to go to one of us kids when we were old enough to understand what had happened. The watch was stopped at 9:17, presumably the time of the crash. There was a small dent on one side, and the crystal was cracked. I put it on, feeling a connection to my father that I'd never had before. It felt right somehow, like a piece of me that had been missing was finally in place. We drove back to the farm in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The weight of everything we'd learned was almost too much to bear. Our mother wasn't just emotionally abusive and financially dishonest. She might be a murderer. Back at the farm, we spread out all the evidence on the kitchen table. The bank statements, the diary entries, the police reports, the letters. It painted a damning picture, but was it enough? What were we going to do with this information? Ethan wanted to go to the police, but I wasn't sure. The accident had happened over 20 years ago. Would they even investigate? And what if we were wrong? What if Dad's death really was an accident, and we were just looking for someone to blame? As we debated our next move, my phone rang. It was Mom. She wanted to come over to talk. She said she had something important to tell us, something about Melissa. I put the phone on speaker so Ethan and Tyler could hear. Her voice sounded strange, almost desperate. I told her to come over, then quickly gathered up all the evidence and hid it in Harold's old safe in the barn. We didn't want her to know what we'd discovered, not yet. We needed to hear what she had to say first. Mom arrived an hour later. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes rumpled. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she accepted the cup of coffee I offered her. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. She looked so broken, so lost. But then I remembered Melissa. I remembered all the years of emotional abuse. I remembered Dad's letter, and my heart hardened again. Mom started talking, her voice barely above a whisper. She admitted to taking the money from the trust fund. She said she'd convinced herself she deserved it. For all the years of raising us alone, she knew it was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. She also admitted to the things she'd said to Melissa, the horrible, cruel words that had pushed my sister over the edge. She was crying now, genuine tears of remorse, or at least, they seemed genuine. After a lifetime of her manipulation, it was hard to tell. Then she dropped the bombshell. She knew we'd been investigating Dad's death. A friend at the bank had told her about us accessing Melissa's safe deposit box. She knew what we'd found, or at least, she thought she did. She looked each of us in the eye and said the words I'd been dreading to hear. Dad's death wasn't an accident, but she hadn't unalived him. He'd unalived himself, just like she'd told Melissa. He'd been depressed for months, unhappy in their marriage but unwilling to leave his children. The night he died, they'd had a huge fight. He'd stormed out, and a few hours later, the police were at the door. I didn't know whether to believe her. It contradicted what Patrick had told us, what Dad's own letter suggested. Was Mom lying to cover her tracks? Or had Dad really taken his own life, and Mom had been carrying that burden all these years? Ethan asked why she'd never told us the truth. Mom said she wanted to protect us, to shield us from the pain of knowing our father had chosen to leave us. It was easier to let us believe it was an accident, but the guilt had eaten away at her, turning her bitter and angry, and she'd taken that anger out on us, especially on me, who looked so much like him. It was a convenient explanation. Too convenient. It explained her behavior without admitting to any crime. I looked at Ethan and Tyler, trying to gauge their reactions. Ethan seemed uncertain, wanting to believe her. Tyler looked skeptical, his arms crossed over his chest. I decided to push harder. I asked Mom about the letter Dad wrote to Harold, about his plans to leave her and seek custody of us kids. Her face changed then, hardening into something ugly and familiar. She denied knowing anything about any letter. She said I was making things up, just like I'd made up the inheritance. And there it was, the mask slipping, revealing the manipulative, gaslighting woman we'd grown up with. I stood up and walked to the barn, returning with the letter. I placed it in front of her, watching her face as she read it. The color drained from her cheeks. She looked up at me, then at Ethan, her eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. She started to say something, then stopped. For once in her life, she seemed at a loss for words. That's when I pulled out Dad's watch, placing it on the table next to the letter. I told her what Patrick had told us, about Dad's call just before the accident, about his appointment with the lawyer. I asked her directly, did she have something to do with Dad's death? Mom's hands were shaking uncontrollably now. She knocked over her coffee cup, sending brown liquid spreading across the table, soaking into the letter. She didn't even seem to notice. She was staring at the watch, at the time frozen on its face. And then she started talking, really talking, in a way I'd never heard before. The words poured out of her like a dam breaking, about how Dad had threatened to take us away from her, about how she'd followed him that night, confronted him on that lonely road, about how they'd argued, and she'd grabbed the steering wheel in anger, sending the car veering off the road into that tree. She hadn't meant to kill him. It was an accident, a moment of rage with tragic consequences, but she'd let everyone believe Dad had lost control of the car. She'd lied to the police, to Harold, to us kids. She'd been living with that lie for over 20 years. The three of us sat in stunned silence as Mom broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably at the kitchen table. The truth was finally out, but it brought no satisfaction, no sense of justice, just a hollow emptiness where our family should have been. I sat there frozen, staring at my mom as she sobbed. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Ethan had his head in his hands. Tyler just kept shaking his head in disbelief. It was like we'd all been dropped into some messed up crime show, except this was our actual lives. After what felt like forever, I finally spoke up. I asked Mom what happened after the crash. She wiped her eyes with a napkin and told us she'd panicked. She'd climbed out of the passenger side of the car and walked half a mile to a gas station to call for help. She told the police she wasn't in the car, that Dad had left the house alone after their fight. No one questioned her story. The road was dark and rural, no witnesses. The police ruled it an accident. Case closed. She got the life insurance money and moved on with raising 3 kids alone. Or at least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Ethan suddenly stood up, knocking his chair over backward. His face was red with anger. He started yelling at Mom, asking how she could live with herself all these years, how she could treat her own children the way she did after what she'd done. Mom just sat there taking it, like she knew she deserved every word. I felt weirdly calm, like I'd finally found the missing piece to a puzzle I'd been working on my whole life. It explained so much. Why Mom couldn't look at me without resentment. Why our family was so broken. I wasn't just a reminder of Dad. I was a reminder of what she'd done. Tyler got up and walked outside. I followed him to the porch, leaving Ethan to continue his tirade. Tyler lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He'd quit when Melissa asked him to, but I guess today was an exception. He offered me one, and for the first time in my life, I took it. We stood there smoking in silence, watching the sun start to set over Harold's fields. Tyler finally spoke up. He asked what we were going to do now. Go to the police? Pretend we never heard any of this? There was no good answer. I honestly didn't know. The statute of limitations for manslaughter was probably long expired, and even if it wasn't, did I really want to see my mom go to jail? As messed up as she was still my mom, the only parent I had left. We went back inside to find Ethan sitting at the table alone. Mom had locked herself in the bathroom. We could hear her crying through the door. Ethan looked exhausted, all the fight drained out of him. He told us Mom had admitted to taking all the money from the trust fund too. She'd spent most of it, but there was still about $40,000 left in her savings account. She'd promised to sign it over to us tomorrow. I laughed bitterly. Like money could fix any of this. Like it could bring back Melissa or Dad. Like it could erase the years of emotional abuse we'd all suffered. But I guess it was something. A small acknowledgement of the wrong she'd done. We decided to take turns keeping an eye on Mom that night. None of us trusted her to be alone after everything that had come out. I took the first shift, sitting outside the bathroom door until she finally came out, red-eyed and exhausted. I walked her to the guest room and sat in a chair by the door while she fell into a fitful sleep. Ethan relieved me around midnight. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I kept thinking about Melissa, about how she'd discovered all this on her own, how she must have felt, carrying that knowledge by herself. I wished she'd reached out to me. Maybe together we could have handled it better. Maybe she'd still be alive. The next morning was awkward as hell. Mom shuffled around the kitchen like a ghost, making coffee that no one wanted. Tyler had crashed on the couch and was still asleep. Ethan looked like he hadn't slept at all. I decided we needed a plan. We couldn't just keep sitting around staring at each other. I suggested we all go to the bank together. Mom could transfer what was left of the trust fund money, and we could figure out what to do from there. Mom nodded meekly, a shadow of the domineering woman who'd terrorized us growing up. It was almost harder seeing her like this, broken, defeated. Part of me felt sorry for her. The other part thought she deserved every bit of pain she was feeling. We piled into 2 cars and drove to First National Bank. Roger, the manager, recognized me again and ushered us into his office when I explained we needed to make some transfers. Mom signed the paperwork without a word, transferring the remaining $43,627 to a new account in mine and Ethan's names. As we were leaving the bank, Mom suddenly stopped walking. She turned to us with tears in her eyes and said she knew money couldn't fix what she'd done. She said she was going to turn herself in to the police, tell them everything about Dad's death. I was stunned. I hadn't expected that. Ethan looked equally shocked. We stood there in the bank parking lot, trying to process what she was saying. A part of me wanted her to face consequences for what she'd done, but another part knew that sending my mom to jail wouldn't bring Dad back. It wouldn't bring Melissa back either. Before I could respond, Tyler walked up and handed Mom something. It was a business card for a therapist. Not Melissa's, but someone new. He told Mom that turning herself in wouldn't help anyone. What would help was getting professional help, dealing with her issues instead of taking them out on her kids. I was surprised by Tyler's compassion. After everything Mom's actions had cost him, he was still able to see her as a human being who needed help. It made me see him in a whole new light. I understood why Melissa had loved him. Mom took the card with trembling hands. She promised to call and make an appointment. I didn't know if I believed her, but it was a start. We drove back to the farm in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Back at the farm, we sat down to figure out what to do next. The money from the trust fund wasn't life-changing, but split 3 ways. We all agreed Tyler should get Melissa's share. It was enough to make a difference. For me, it meant I could finally fix up the farm properly, make it profitable again. Ethan decided he'd use his share to go back to school. He'd always wanted to be a teacher, but had settled for a job at the local factory because it paid better. Tyler wasn't sure what he'd do with his portion. Maybe travel, something he and Melissa had always talked about doing together. As for Mom, we agreed she needed professional help. Serious, long-term therapy. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I didn't know if I ever would be, but I also didn't want her to end up like Melissa. The cycle of pain had to stop somewhere. We decided Mom would move in with Ethan temporarily. His apartment had a spare room, and he worked days so he could keep an eye on her. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than her being alone with her guilt and regret. That evening, after Mom and Ethan had left, Tyler and I sat on the porch drinking beers. The same porch where Harold used to sit and tell me stories about my dad when I was a kid. Stories I now realized were his way of making sure I knew who my father really was, not the version Mom had created. Tyler asked if I thought we'd done the right thing, not making Mom go to the police. I honestly didn't know. The legal system probably couldn't give us the justice or closure we needed anyway. What we needed was to heal, to move forward somehow. Tyler stayed at the farm for another week, helping me fix up the place. It was therapeutic for both of us, I think. Physical labor has a way of clearing your head when everything else is a mess. We repaired fences, patched the barn roof, and even got Harold's old tractor running properly. The day before Tyler left to go back to his and Melissa's apartment, we visited her grave together. It was a simple headstone in the local cemetery, with her name and dates. Nothing about who she really was, the battles she'd fought, the truths she'd uncovered. I placed a small potted plant by her headstone, forget-me-nots, her favorite. Tyler put down a framed photo of the 2 of them from happier times. We stood there for a while, not saying anything. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. As we were leaving, Tyler handed me something. It was the engagement ring he'd shown me before, the one he'd planned to give Melissa. He said he wanted me to have it, to sell it, and put the money toward the farm. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. He said Melissa would have wanted the farm to thrive again. I took the ring, touched by the gesture. I promised Tyler he'd always have a place at the farm if he wanted it. He smiled sadly and said he'd take me up on that someday, but first he needed to get away for a while, process everything everything that had happened. Over the next few months, I threw myself into restoring the farm. I used the trust fund money to buy new equipment and hire a couple of local kids to help with the heavy work. By spring, we had crops in the ground and a small herd of cattle grazing in the back pasture. Ethan called regularly with updates on Mom. She was seeing the therapist twice a week and taking medication for depression. She'd good days and bad days, but overall, she seemed to be making progress. She'd even started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding some purpose in caring for abandoned pets. I wasn't ready to see her yet, but I didn't hang up when she got on the phone anymore. Small steps. That's what the therapist I'd started seeing myself called it. Small steps toward healing. Tyler kept his promise to visit. He showed up that summer with a tan and stories from his travels across the country. He looked better, less haunted. He stayed for a week, helping with the harvest and sleeping in the guest room that used to be Harold's. The night before he left, we sat on the porch like old times. He told me he'd met someone, a girl named Rebecca, who worked at a bookstore in Portland. It wasn't serious yet, but he liked her. I was happy for him. Melissa would have wanted him to move on, to find happiness again. As for me, I was finding my own kind of peace. The farm was doing well. I'd made friends with neighboring farmers, become part of a community. I'd even gone on a few dates with a local veterinarian named Sarah, who'd come out to check on one of my cows. I still thought about Melissa every day, about the sister I never really got to know until it was too late, about the family we could have been if things had been different. But I was learning to live with the past without letting it consume me. One evening, as I was closing up the barn, I found an old photo that had fallen behind a shelf. It was of me, Melissa, and Ethan as kids, sitting on Harold's tractor. We were all smiling, genuinely happy in that moment. I didn't remember the photo being taken, but there it was, proof that there had been good times among the bad. I had it framed and put it on my bedside table, a reminder that even in the most broken families, there can be moments of connection, and that sometimes, the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward healing. I never did sell Tyler's engagement ring. Instead, I kept it in Harold's old safe, along with Dad's watch and all the evidence we'd gathered about his death. Some truths are too important to let go, even if they hurt. They're part of who we are, part of our story. And as for my story, it's still being written, day by day, season by season, on this farm that was never really an inheritance, but turned out to be exactly what I needed all along.